So our screen looks a little bit different. What I'm going to be going over today are the SLD, the specific learning disability pages. There are actually 3 pages. And the easiest way for me to show you would be to have the pages side by side. So as you can tell, the left-hand side is the SLD that talks about the discrepancy. And on the right-hand side, this is the PSW, Patterns of Strength and Weakness. So please bear with me as we kind of travel through our 2 PDFs side by side. And as I scroll down, you're going to see a little bit more of what the second half of those pages look like, as well as our third page. All right. Thank you for bearing with me. So we are not on the SEIS page. What we did was we had printed or saved it as a PDF, and that's what we're actually looking at, okay? So there are 3 pages specific to SLD, the Specific Learning Disability Discrepancy Forms that have now been adopted by our SELPA. So your school psychologist will actually be the one to take the lead in reviewing these documents for any initial or triennial IEP where SLD is actually considered a disabling condition for the student, whether it be primary or secondary. The first 2 forms, again, the discrepancy and the PSW, are essentially the same and are divided into 7 different sections or subsections. Okay, so you'll be able to see them right here, section 1 as well as section 1 here, and they have each page has 7 of them. The only variation between the discrepancy versus the PSW is actually found in section 1, so right around here, okay? However, the end result of section 1 is the same. So even though there's a part in here that looks different on the discrepancy versus the PSW, the outcome of each of those sections is essentially the same. It's letting us determine which area of academic functioning is directly related to a potential processing disorder, which results in a learning disability. So actually on both forms, the primary purpose of section 1 is to ensure that the IEP team has considered whether or not the severe discrepancy exists and that the team has not used just a single score to find the student eligible under SLD. Okay? So here in section 1, the discrepancy and in the PSW, your school psychologist will take the lead to determine whether or not the student meets point A, and this is a severe discrepancy between intellectual ability and their achievement based on valid standardized test scores. B, a discrepancy based on alternative measures, which would be utilized for any student of African American descent, because we do not provide IQ testing for students who are African American. And then C, the discrepancy is resultant of a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes as documented by information reported on the 3rd form, which is called the SLD Discrepancy Documentation Report. So if we are marking C, if your IEP team, your school psychologist is marking C, and it says it here, complete and attach the SLD Discrepancy Documentation Form, which essentially is our last, our last form right here. So this discrepancy documentation report needs to be attached if you are checking C on the first page, okay? So here we'll go over a little bit more, but essentially if you do mark C on the discrepancy of eligibility, you will need to attach that 3rd form. All right. So the documentation report, which is that 3rd form that we just saw, and I'll scroll back down to it, sorry, should be used in instances where the student does not exhibit a severe discrepancy between their ability and achievement as measured by standardized tests, but significant weaknesses are documented through data obtained through assessment instruments, information provided by parents or teachers, as well as a summary of the student's classroom performance as noted through observations, work samples, or group test scores. And each of these areas should be considered in light of the student's age and any other relevant information. So as you can see, it asks for data from assessments, information provided by the parent, information provided by the teachers, a summary of the classroom performance, work samples, group test scores, and then consideration of the pupil's age. Okay. If we scroll back up, if you look at the PSW page under section 1, it does not have the A, B, and C section. So what is here, okay, is not on the PSW page, all right? Rather, when using the PSW model, the team needs to determine whether the student exhibits a pattern of strengths and weaknesses in performance, achievement, or even both, relative to age, their state-approved grade level standards, or intellectual development. As your school psychologist will continue to be trained in this, in using PSW in terms of analysis and interpretation, many teams are beginning to use the PSW form right here to determine a student's eligibility for SLD. All right, so section 1 on both of these, note which academic area is affected. So these choices are, don't look at section 2, are the same in both areas. So which academic areas are affected, okay? As we scroll into, now we can look at section 2, all right? So section 2 here, as well as in PSW, although the question on the two forms is slightly different, the intent remains the same. The team will need to answer whether the discrepancy model, or SLD, as noted in section 1, is directly related to a processing disorder. If yes, the affected areas of processing should be checked. Okay, so if we mark yes, then we need to let them know which of these processing areas is affected. Same thing here. So if it's yes, which areas are being affected? The areas include sensory motor, visual processing, auditory processing, attention, phonological processing, or cognitive abilities, which includes association, conceptualization, and expression. Okay? In section 3, both here and here, this section actually addresses exclusionary factors, whereby the team must conclude that SLD is not resultant of learning problems that are primarily the result of visual, hearing, or motor disabilities, of an intellectual disability, an emotional disturbance, or of environmental, cultural, or economic disadvantage. So each box in this section should be checked no. If the team wishes to find the student eligible under SLD, all of these boxes need to be marked as no. Because if they're marked as yes, then it's excluding them from the ability to be qualified under the eligibility category of SLD. Okay. In addition, points A and B in section 3 attest to the fact that the student was provided with appropriate instruction in general ed delivered by qualified personnel, and that classroom data was reviewed and progress was reported to the student's parents. Okay, same thing in both sections. So if we scroll a little further, right here on the left side, which is the SLD page, section 4 starts here, and you'll actually get to see a little bit more on the PSW side about section 4. So I'm just going to scroll up a little bit so you'll be able to kind of see a little bit more of both sides. But each of these sections are fairly self-explanatory. In section 4, the box for psychoeducational evaluation, utilizing multiple measures should be checked. If there is anything other, then make sure that you're specifying. Okay, so we provide a how to complete this and then an example for both sections. How to complete it. So they're pretty much self-explanatory. Section 5 Either provide a brief summary of observation or refer to the observation section of the psych report. In section 6, which is here and then here, you're going to note if there are any educationally relevant medical findings. And then in section 7, which is the conclusion for both sides, the team will need to conclude by checking either yes or no, right here and here, as to whether or not the student has a specific learning disability and if the degree of impairment requires special education services. Both boxes must be checked yes in order to say that the student meets criteria for SLD. So just make sure that these are marked as yes if you're qualifying them for SLD, and all of these must be marked as no. All right. Again, there are two different forms here, essentially the same. One's the discrepancy and one is the patterns of strengths and weaknesses. If you are using SLD and you are marking C is when you are filling out the third page. Okay. So just know that at the end of the first page of SLD and for the PSW, the parent as well as the other team members that are available or that attended would be signing here in agreement to the conclusions that were stated above. If there's a dissenting team member and he or she could not sign on the line at the end of the worksheet to indicate that excuse me, their assessments differ from the above report, it would need to be included in a written statement. Okay, so if you see my assessment of the student differs from the above, they would sign. Okay. All right, guys, I hope this helped. Again, the third page, the discrepancy documentation report, there is a how-to and an example in here. But again, this third page only needs to be completed if on the SLD page, C is checked. Okay. All right, guys, thank you so much.